Welcome to the Ask Junior Daily Judgment Podcast. I'm Priya Sharma, and joining me today is Arjun Gupta.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to dive into today's important judgments. But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast if you enjoy our daily legal breakdowns.
That's right. Your support helps us reach more listeners and continue providing in-depth analysis of the latest court decisions. Now let's get started with today's case. Arjun, our case today is V. Praveen Kumar and Others versus the State of Telangana and Others, decided by the High Court of Delhi. This case revolves around the constitutional validity of a provision that allowed for the regularization of contract employees in the state of Telangana.
That's a very interesting case, Priya. Before we get into the specifics, could you elaborate on what regularization means in this context?
Absolutely. Regularization in this case means granting permanent employment status to someone who was previously employed on a contract basis. Essentially, it's a way of converting temporary or contract jobs into permanent positions with all the benefits and security that comes with it.
I see. So let's look at the key facts of this case.
Okay, so the petitioners V. Praveen Kumar and other unemployed youth challenge the constitutional validity of Section 10A of the Telangana Regulation of Appointments to Public Services and Rationalization of Staff Pattern and Pay Structure Act 1994.
And what was the issue with Section 10A?
Section 10A was inserted into the Act by a government order in 2016. It allowed the government to regularize the services of individuals who had been appointed on a contract basis against sanctioned posts.
Okay, and what was the petitioner's main argument against this regularization?
The petitioners argued that these contractual appointments were made without following the proper procedure. No public advertisement was issued, and the selection process was conducted in an opaque manner. They also argued that these appointments violated the existing education service rules, which prescribed specific methods for recruitment.
So, the issue here is that the government seemed to be circumventing established rules to give permanent jobs to those who were previously employed on contract. That's a serious allegation.
Exactly. The government defended its actions by citing Section 101 of the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act 2014, which empowers them to adapt laws. They claimed that the regularization was a one-time measure done in accordance with guidelines laid down by the Supreme Court.
This brings us to the legal questions involved in this case. What are the key legal issues that the High Court had to grapple with?
The High Court had to address several crucial legal questions. First, they had to determine the constitutional validity of Section 10A itself. Did it violate the principle of equality by creating a separate, less rigorous pathway to permanent employment?
This is an important point, Priya. It's about ensuring fairness in the recruitment process, isn't it? If the government can bypass established procedures, then it creates an uneven playing field for potential candidates.
And that brings us to the second key legal question. Did the state have the power, under Section 101 of the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act, to introduce Section 10A without amending or repealing the existing education service rules?
So, was the government overstepping its bounds by introducing a new provision that contradicted the existing rules?
Exactly. The court had to determine if Section 10A was a legitimate adaptation of existing laws or an illegal attempt to circumvent them. Let's move on to the ratio decidendi of the case. What was the court's reasoning, and how did it apply the relevant legal principles?
The court's reasoning is quite detailed and complex, Priya, but we can break it down into its main points. First, they address the issue of res judicata.
Let's pause there, Arjun. For our listeners, could you explain what res judicata is?
Sure. Res judicata, literally meaning a matter adjudged, is a legal principle that prevents the same issue from being litigated repeatedly. If a court has already decided on a particular matter, that decision is binding and cannot be revisited.
Thanks for clarifying that. So how did the High Court apply this principle to the present case?
The respondents, the state of Telangana, argued that this case was barred by res judicata because a similar PIL had been dismissed earlier. However, the High Court found that the earlier dismissal was not based on the merits of the case, but on technical grounds of maintainability.
So, even though a similar petition was dismissed, the current case had its own unique arguments and circumstances, so it wasn't barred by res judicata.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the key aspect of this case, which is the constitutional validity of Section 10A.
The court examined Section 10A through the lens of Section 101 of the Reorganization Act, which deals with the power to adapt laws. The court found that Section 10A wasn't a valid exercise of adaptation power.
Why not?
The court reasoned that Section 10A didn't actually modify or repeal any existing laws. It created a parallel provision with different eligibility conditions and a different methodology for selection, while the Education Service rules remained in force. The court emphasized that Section 101 allows for adaptation by modifying, amending, or repealing existing laws, not by introducing independent provisions that contradict existing statutory rules.
So, it was like having two separate sets of rules for the same thing, which created confusion and undermined the fairness of the process.
Absolutely. The court also considered the non-obstante clause in Section 10A. Could you explain that, Arjun?
The non obstante clause is a legal provision that essentially means notwithstanding anything contained in this act. It gives a particular provision precedence over other provisions within the same act.
And how did the court analyze the non-obstante clause in this case?
The court found that the non-obstant clause in Section 10A only had overriding effect on other provisions within the Act of 1994, not on other laws like the Education Service rules.
So, even though Section 10A tried to override the Education Service rules, the court found that it lacked the legal power to do so because it didn't explicitly repeal or modify those rules.
Exactly. This brings us to another key aspect of the court's decision: the regularization of contractual employees. The court drew a distinction between daily wage workers and contractual employees based on the Supreme Court's judgment in the Uma Devi case.
Let's explain the Uma Devi case for our listeners, Arjun.
The Uma Devi case dealt with the regularization of daily wage workers, specifically those who had completed 10 years of service as of April 10, 2006. The Supreme Court allowed the regularization of these daily wage workers as a one-time measure, considering their long service and the fact that they were effectively working like permanent employees.
So, how did the High Court in this case apply the Uma Devi principle?
The High Court emphasized that the Uma Devi principle applied only to daily wage or casual workers, not to contractual employees. The court also found that the initial contractual appointments themselves were problematic because they were made without public advertisement or a transparent procedure, which goes against the principle of fair and open competition.
So, the court considered that regularizing the contract employees in this case was a violation of the principle of fair recruitment and went against the spirit of the Uma Devi judgment.
Exactly. However, despite finding the regularization illegal, the court considered several factors regarding the existing employees who had been regularized. They acknowledged that reverting these employees after 15 years of service would be inequitable, especially in light of precedents like the M.A. Hamid and Tridip Kumar Dingle cases.
This brings us to an important point, Arjun. Even though the court found the regularization to be illegal, it didn't automatically terminate all of the employees who had already been regularized.
That's right. The court used its discretionary power under Article 226 to balance legal principles with public interest and equity. They recognized that these employees had already served for a considerable period, and it could create a significant hardship for them to be suddenly terminated.
So, in essence, the court was balancing the legal need for a fair and transparent recruitment process with the practical realities of the situation.
Absolutely. Now, let's summarize the court's final decision.
The court declared Section 10A of the Telangana Act as ultra vires, meaning it was beyond the legal power of the state to enact. Consequently, they set aside the provision.
But the court didn't terminate the employees who had already been regularized.
Correct. The court ruled that the state government should fill up the posts in accordance with the law, not by regularizing contractual employees.
This is a significant judgment, Priya. It clarifies the limits of the state's power to adapt laws and highlights the importance of fair and transparent recruitment processes.
It also underscores the court's role in balancing legal principles with practical considerations.
And that wraps up our analysis of today's judgment. We hope you found our discussion informative and engaging.
Before we sign off, we'd like to remind our listeners once again to like, subscribe, and share our podcast. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you daily updates on the most important legal decisions.
Absolutely. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for another exciting episode. Until then, this is Priya Sharma.
And Arjun Gupta, signing off. Thanks for listening to the Ask Junior Daily Judgment podcast.